Hey guys, how you doing? Tuesday morning Devos with Nick. We talked about attitudes last week. Your attitude should be the same as that of Christ Jesus. We talked about that. And still thinking about attitudes this week. We're looking at this verse in Ephesians chapter 4, verses 22 and 23, that says, "You were taught with regard to your former way of life to put off your old self, which is being corrupted by its deceitful desires, to be made new in the attitude of your minds, and to put on the new self, created to be like God in true righteousness and holiness." Just that language of put off your old self and put on the new self. And there's kind of this kind of assumed clothing language, isn't there? In that there's like this intentional decision every day we get up, we got to take off that old self, those selfish desires and the self-centeredness and maybe the rebellion, maybe the grumpiness, the irritability, whatever it is, right? Whatever that old stuff, fleshly life kind of stuff is, we got to take that off every day, and we got to put on the new self, put on Christ, because there's this just continual thing that happens where even though we put on these kind of new garments, they sort of magically through the night or whatever through the day, they kind of tend to switch back sometimes, don't they? And so we have to make this daily effort of putting on the new self. And it occurred to me just how often in Paul, a few times I can think of anywhere, where clothing language is this metaphor that he uses. I think about, it's not exactly the same, but similar in Ephesians chapter 6, where he talks about the armor of God. And I know that's not clothing exactly, but armor, kind of putting on this stuff that you wear, helmet of salvation, sword of the Spirit, breastplate of righteousness, that kind of thing, that there's this intentional thing we do, metaphorically, of course, but we intentionally put things on. Or I think of Colossians chapter 3, where he gives this big long list of virtues and then ends by saying, "And over all of these put on love, which binds them all together in perfect harmony." And again, this idea that love is like this overcoat that goes on last to kind of bind everything else together. But again, that clothing language of we're intentionally putting this on every day. We have to intentionally take off the old self, take off our old attitudes, take off our grumpiness, our cynicism, whatever it is, right? It's different for everybody. We take that old stuff off and we put on Christ, put on the new self. And that's resonating with me today about that daily challenge to make that change, to just be really intentional about choosing our attitudes, and how I think if we don't do that, if we lapse into laziness or whatever else for a few days or a few weeks or a few months or a few years, how natural that old self, those old behaviors become. And it's kind of this idea when you jump in a river, you just automatically go the direction of the current, and the current's always in the direction we don't want to go, right? It always seems to make us more selfish, more grumpy, more anxious, more fearful, whatever. Growth tends to happen upstream, right? We have to swim up the stream, and that takes some really intentional effort. And that's just kind of seems to be a reality of life, right? Is that to grow, to do hard things, to become better, to grow in our character and our attitudes, takes some intentional effort. We have to swim upstream. We have to put on the new self every day. So I encourage you, friends, do that this week. Think about how you can put on the new self. We take off the old self, we put on the new self. Blessings.